The canon law itself is clear about it. Pope Francis, by his own apostasy, has been excommunicated from the Catholic Church and no longer has authority as Pope. And certainly, he can no longer be the authority of the Catholic Church. In 2,000 years of Christianity, we have had all kinds of popes, from the most gracious ones to those Satan himself envies their cleverness to do evil. For example, we had Pope Benedict IX, who sold his papacy 3 times, a great businessman, I have to say. We also had Pope Urban VI, who had cardinals that disagreed with him tortured and got angry because he said he didn't hear them scream loud enough when they were being tortured. And of course, the famous Alexander VI. Murders, conspiracies, wars, and all sorts of immoralities. A papacy darker than the Black Death pandemic. There were also other popes whose scandals were more because of heresies, doctrinal errors, and controversial opinions. But what never happened in 2,000 years of Christianity is a pontiff that openly apostatized like Pope Francis just did. An apostasy is an open and public renouncement to the profession of faith. In simple words, publicly saying, I'm no longer Catholic or Christian, and I don't want anything to do with it. In the first centuries and until the Middle Ages, an apostasy was carried out publicly by stepping on a crucifix, spitting on and breaking sacred images, burning them, and openly renouncing the Christian faith. In modern times, it is carried out by openly renouncing the faith with an official document and excommunication requested from the Church at times. Well, on October 3rd of this year, Pope Francis openly and publicly declared his apostasy against the Christian faith, against the Catholic Church, in his encyclical Fratelli Tutti, in which he declares that God is no longer needed, that the Christian faith is no longer needed, that the salvation of the world and that of the humankind depends only on the human being and not on God. Before continuing, I want to clarify something. This encyclical has over 38,000 words, which I have read and analyzed more than 4 times to avoid any ambiguity. The encyclical is available to the public and can be read by anyone. Please read it whenever you get a chance. Most people don't even know that such document exists. And the reason for that was planned, I believe, as many in the Vatican try to cover it up with the scandal of Cardinal McCarrick and the comments of Pope Francis on homosexual unions. It is no secret that Pope Francis has been accused of being a heretic, a socialist, and many other things, all of which in themselves have no direct impact on his authority and ecclesiastical office. However, an apostasy is different. An apostasy automatically removes him as the Pope and authority of the Church. Yes, that is different. The canon law itself is clear about it. Code 1364 number 1 says that the apostate of the faith who has publicly departed from the Catholic faith incurs excommunication latae sententia, automatic and without ecclesiastical judgment. And the cleric is punished with the penalties of the prohibition to reside in a certain place and the removal of authority, office, title, and position. In plain English, Pope Francis, by his own apostasy, has been excommunicated from the Catholic Church and no longer has authority as Pope. And certainly, he can no longer be the authority of the Catholic Church. Fratelli Tutti, which translates in fraternity, is the newest official document of the excommunicated Pope Francis. A solid understanding in theology and philosophy is not needed to understand the document and its apostasy, but it is necessary to know the essential and universal principle of all Christian and Catholic doctrines, that people cannot be saved or redeemed by themselves, or be saved and redeemed by another finite creature. Only God brings salvation, and without God any attempt to save ourselves is useless. That is the center of all Christian and Catholic doctrines. Denying that is to say that Christ died in vain, that God is not needed, that all the sacraments are a lie and a fraud, and that even prayer is a waste of time. And that prayer, the sacraments, religious life, and the profession of our faith is contrary to the will of God. And that is exactly what the excommunicated Pope Francis apostatized in his encyclical Fratelli Tutti. The document begins by presenting the problem that humanity is facing. All the problems, wars, poverty, disease, ideologies, violence, immoralities, you name it. Then it further explains that such evils are the result of not being a good Samaritan and having reverence for God. Yes, he's blaming practicing Christians and Catholics for all the problems. He absolutely never says that such evils are the consequences of sin or the consequences of kicking God out of our lives, but that it is the result of a lack of brotherhood and people's believing God. That believing in God and having a reverence for God is making people evil. Using the parable of the Good Samaritan, or as I would say, mutilating it and twisting its fundamental message, he stipulates that God himself commands that the solution to all the problems of humanity is not in a true relationship with God and his grace, but in being a good Samaritan, which is the main stipulation of the entire encyclical. He represents it over and over again in paradoxes where he states that not believing in God makes you live God's will better than believers. So renounce to your faith and become a pagan because that is God's will. In the second chapter, he goes on to the details explaining that Jesus on purpose mentions and approves that the Good Samaritan was not a Jew with reverence for God, but considered an idolatrous, impure, and dangerous pagan. And that is what Jesus wants. Or in simple words, that being a pagan and an idolater is what Jesus wants from you. Jesus do not want you to be faithful to God as long as you are a good Samaritan. The entire second chapter is full of paradoxes and assertions of this nature, where it implicitly and explicitly stipulates that the renunciation of our faith is not only necessary to solve all the problems of humanity, but that it is something that God himself commands. Clearly a hideous apostasy in conformity with paganism. The third chapter seems to get worse. He affirms that human beings are made in such a way that will not realize themselves, develop, and find their fullness unless they give themselves to others. Faith in God, prayer, and relationship with your Creator is no longer needed for the human fulfillment. None of that matters. Giving yourself to others is the new law. The purpose and dignity of the human person is no longer in God, but in another finite creature, which again negates all the need for grace, sacrament, prayers, religious life, faith, and everything that is needed. None of that is needed anymore. Another hideous apostasy in conformity with human secularism. From chapter 4 to 8 gets worse. He commands everyone to accept all cultures, beliefs, religious practices, idolatrous cults, shamanism, and everything that involves having to accept the social and cultural differences of others. Otherwise, according to him, there won't be a healthy relationship and true openness. And it will violate their identity. So if you know a shaman who still makes human sacrifices, tell him that excommunicated Pope Francis has opened the doors of the church for him and will not be asked to convert or to move away from such practices. He is welcome. And every Catholic is exhorted to accept it. Moreover, he concludes in his encyclical by quoting a Muslim leader saying that the Grand Imam Ahmad is absolutely right in stipulating the need and acceptance of all religions. So who cares about what the Word of God says? Let's consult with Imam Ahmad, which is his third hideous apostasy in conformity with Islamism and shamanism. The encyclical is well written. It is an ecclesiastical document. There is no room for error. There is no room for different interpretations. There is no room for excuses or justifications. The excommunicated Pope Francis said what he said and apostatized. Why he did it? What are his plans? Why the bishops have not said anything about it other than try to cover it up? Those are issues that I will discuss separately. But at this point, it is clear that by the canon law, Pope Francis is automatically and without ecclesiastical judgment excommunicated. And his authority as Pope is nullified. And at this point, it is now the responsibility of the Church, of the laity, to openly request his resignation from all administrative duties. He no longer has to be in charge of anything. So here it goes. Excommunicated Francis I, in the name of the Church and by the authority that the baptismal faith grants me, I order you to resign from all administrative duties of the Church and completely withdraw from it. Thanks for watching. Share and subscribe because this is the only channel where we are not afraid to talk about things that most people are.